Extreme radio for extreme times. This is A View from Space with the Spaceman on Talk Radio AM 640.
On the guy they call Space, this is A View from Space. I'd like to welcome you in if you're driving around town right now. Or if you're at work, maybe listening to AM 640, I welcome you in. Or if you're listening to me right now on Shaw Direct, channel 865, picking up the show there, I welcome you in also. Or if you're listening on your 3 or 4G personal communication device by the Stream the World software, I welcome you in too. Or if you're what some call the best seat in the house, sitting in front of your Mac, your PC at home, logged on to 640toronto.com on the website, picking up the live audio streaming there, I welcome you in. Wherever you are in the world, I welcome you in. The elite Illuminati representatives were out in force this past week in the Illuminati-controlled mass media, weren't they? Wow! Or did you piece it all together? The Duchess of Cambridge, Catherine, wife of Prince William, visited Brook Hill Children's Centre in Woolwich in London earlier this week and told everybody when the second child was to arrive. Supposed to be by mid to end of April, she said. Yes, and the dress she was wearing sold out completely, a $35 dress, giving the royals that, well, commoner feel. When in actual fact, I don't believe that she's carrying a baby at all. I believe it's one of those baby bumps that you can buy and strap on. They use them in motion pictures and things like that. See, I don't believe that the rich at all ever want to ruin their body or, do something as base as give birth to a child. No, they use surrogates. But they were there. At least Catherine was there showing off the bump and giving everybody a little taste of what might come. Happiness. The birth of a child. Prince Harry also made an appearance, announcing this week. Did you see he was leaving the British Armed Forces? Yes, Prince Harry and the Duchess of Cambridge out in the Illuminati-controlled mass media today. But not only that, or this week, not only that, as if that wasn't enough, Prince Charles and Camilla, the Duchess of Cornwall, were in the news too, visiting the United States this week. More on that coming up deeper into the Tonight Show, but wow! There was all this high-profile royal action this week. Why? Why was it all crammed into this past week? Do you know why there was all this royal attention and such a high profile this week? Well, you see, the royals must have a presence on this auspicious week because they are the highest-ranking bloodline members of the Illuminati families. They represent the power that is creating this new world order that's being created through all the chaos that's been happening. The royals must have a presence alongside the major news stories of the chaos, but be totally detached from it, therefore showing they're above politics. They never comment on political affairs, if you'll notice. They must be there present in the Illuminati-controlled mass media to show a contrast between the chaotic world and the chaos of a dying system. The royals, you see, represent stability, consistency, unfailing humanitarianism, balance, and and even reverence, because they represent the new system that's to come, the New World Order. You see, this past week has been a very important one in the elite's Wheel of the Year and the magical rituals that accompany these events involving the movement of the sun. They're sun worshippers. One of the major events on this Wheel of the Year is the death date and rebirth, reincarnation of Osiris, the ancient Egyptian sun god, as well as the 2015 spring equinox, of course. Yes, spring arrived yesterday, so it's a time to plant seeds that the Illuminati intends to reap the harvest from later, that are designed to bring about this new world order, this new Camelot, as the royals themselves, I'm sure, see it. One of those seeds planted this week was, of course, the Israeli election results. That'll have a major role to play in another Illuminati seed being planted in the last few days. And I'm referring to Iran's nuclear program. You remember that Obama and Netanyahu were feuding just before the Israeli election. Now Netanyahu back in power. The Israeli Prime Minister has usurped the power of the President of the United States, too, when he got to deliver a speech to Congress on Iran as a nuclear threat to the world 2 weeks earlier on May 3rd. That was just before, as I said, the Israeli election. Now, one of the very high-placed Illuminati hierarchy, a member of the club known as the Six Wise Men, the United States Secretary of State John Kerry, said earlier today that talks with Iran have made genuine progress and the time has come to make hard decisions in reaching a deal to curb Tehran's nuclear program. Iranian President Rouhani said there was nothing that cannot be resolved between the parties, who, I believe, have been instructed to reach a deal with Iran by the end of June. This coming June. The Iranian President Rouhani went on to say, in this round of talks, shared points of view have emerged in some of the areas where there had been a difference of opinion, which can be a foundation for a final agreement. Kerry spoke earlier today. I caught him on the Beeb, and he said he'd meet with European counterparts in London to try and resolve remaining sticking points. You mean get your orders in London to execute? He said talks are going to resume next week to see whether a deal was possible. Kerry's quoted as saying, "We're not rushing, but we recognize the fundamental decisions have to be made now, and they don't get any easier as time goes by. It is time to make hard decisions." The Illuminati have been playing their trump card, which is, of course, the nuclear card, to produce the newest round of scarerism this week. We've been told over and over again, haven't we? Repeating, you see, is a key component of brainwashing. The West suspects Iran of seeking the ability to produce nuclear weapons, and the United Nations has imposed stringent economic sanctions on them. And Iran says its program is intended only for peaceful purposes. Medical technology, nuclear energy, and wants all the sanctions taken off. Now, this whole playing of the nuclear card, which is the Illuminati's biggest threat, forget ISIS, that they could even ever bring against us, began in earnest in 2013. I'm back with more on that. And this peculiar P5+1 level of talks at this conference when I return on Talk Radio AM 640. I'm the Spaceman. This is A View from Space, and I'm just getting started. I'm the Spaceman. It's A View from Space. I communicate by email only. Spaceman at 640toronto.com or space at 640toronto.com. A couple of addresses for you. They start coming in before the show even begins. And I thank you so much for the ones that you do send. KC writes, Space, after hearing your theory about the surrogate birth, it was on another show I did, I've noticed that Kate is the only woman who does not put on 1 ounce of fat during pregnancy. Not only that, she does not have the balance problem other expectant mothers have at 8 months. She can even wear stilettos without a problem. My guess is she's just superhuman because she's royal. LOL. Yes, she doesn't gain an ounce, does she? She looks tremendous. Even after giving birth to Edward, if you'll recall, on the steps of the hospital, looking radiant. Anyway, back to the whole playing of the nuclear card, which is the Illuminati's biggest threat. Even far and above, way bigger than ISIS. But together, along with Russia, well, you have the makings of some kind of global chaos. On the backdrop of all the economies in the world crashing, all of the debt that all of the residents, the citizens of each country have taken on. Someone calls in the debt. It is over. Yes, this three-pronged attack, the nuclear card, ISIS, the economies, it's building, and it is building to something big. That's what I mean about what a week this has just been. It's the seed planting week, you see. Rebirth. Spring. And the nuclear card being played. Cranking it up. It all started in earnest back in November of 2013. November 24th it was. In numerology, that breaks down to a 17. Or the sun worshippers number, as I like to refer to it, an 8. Take your pick. Osiris is going to be reincarnated in this new system. The bloodline is, well, connected with the ancient Osiris that I talk about. They believe that. So the Geneva Interim Agreement, which officially has been titled the Joint Plan of Action on this nuclear deal that's going to be made with Iran. And it's between Iran and the P5+1 countries being held in Geneva, Switzerland, last couple of days. And it consists of a short-term freeze of portions of Iran's nuclear program in exchange for decreased economic sanctions on Iran as the countries work towards a longer-term agreement and lifting all the sanctions. It represents the first formal agreement between the United States and Iran in 34 years, back in 2013. The agreement went into force just a few weeks ago. January 20th, 2014. A few months ago. That date breaks down to a 10. The number of law in numerology. Because you see, it was an agreement. A formal, legal, lawful agreement. They both signed. going into effect January 20th, 2014. The number of law, a 10-day. Senior officials of this interesting P5+1 group and Iran met February 18th and 20th in Vienna, just this past February, and agreed on a framework for future meetings, as they usually do, as this plods slowly along to its final goal of a deal in June. The next round of senior-level talks took place on the death and resurrection date of Osiris, the Egyptian sun god. You know the date, St. Patrick's Day, March 17. That was last year. The meeting was held in Vienna, the capital of Austria. The very first round of the talks between Iran and the very interesting P5+1 group, chaired by the European Union's High Representative Baroness Catherine Ashton. It was held in Kazakh city of Almaty, February 26th through 27th, just 2 days of talks in 2013. That was the very first one that got it all going, with Catherine Ashton as the chair. The two sides agreed to meet again in the city of April, in the same city in April of 2013. Continue the talks after holding those latest expert-level talks in Istanbul, Turkey earlier this week on March 17th. So, just who is this chairperson who kicked off this and presided over this very monster series of meetings that we're almost now to a stage of a nuclear deal with Iran? Who is Baroness Catherine Ashton? Well, that's the person that represents the British royal connection in all of this, the real hidden power on this planet. Catherine Ashton has the initials GCMG after her name. That stands for the Most Distinguished Order of St. Michael and St. George. It's a British order of chivalry, the sixth highest in the land. The order includes 3 classes in descending order of seniority, of course. You might have already guessed that Baroness Catherine Ashton is, of course, in the first class, which is the GCMG, the Grand Knight of the Grand Cross, or Dame of Grand Cross, signified with the letters or initials GCMG after her name. The second class in that same distinguished order has a little less power, the Knight Commander or Dame Commander, as shown by the initials KCMG after their name. And in the final one, the lowest rank, known as simply a companion. That's denoted with the letters CMG after your name. But Catherine Ashton is the top echelon. And something else I found fascinating was John Kerry's mention of what I've been referring to as this very interesting and intriguing organization they're now labeling the P5+1 group, because it's something that popped out of John Kerry's mouth this morning, and I wondered, what the heck was that? Like, I didn't know he was a wise man. One of the 6th wise men in the world. That's coming up. But P5+1, I wondered what it was. And it's merely another Illuminati code name to describe the participants, the movers, the shakers, if you like, in these negotiations. The P5 officially stands for the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, who are, of course, the United Kingdom, well, Britain front and center, United States, Russia, China, and France. They form the P5 part of this interesting P5+1 group. And the +1? Well, who would that be? The +1 is, of course, the real originator of the power, since the royal family of Britain are, in fact, of German descent. The plus one is Germany. It's the plus one in this Illuminati magical group known as P5 plus one. The numerology is incredibly revealing on this name chosen to call these overlords that make up this super powerful world-dominating coven that's making all of the decisions. P is the 16th letter in the alphabet. P5. So 1 plus 6 plus 5, plus 1 equals 13. Well, now, if you're a regular listener to AVFS on Talk Radio AM 640, that's certainly coming as no surprise to you. In fact, you probably expected the number 13 to appear and would be shocked if it was any other number. I would be. You see, 13 is the number of reincarnation. It's the cult's number, the Illuminati's number. And it's even more intriguing if you heard last week's show where 13, the number 13, was front and center in my conversation with you. I mentioned the 6 wise men a few minutes ago, and that John Kerry was in fact a member of this elite group of men. Have you ever heard of this secret group? Because it is very secret. If you haven't, you're about to. I recently discovered that John Kerry was in fact a member of this Wise Men's Club, the one they call the 6 Wise Men. Well, I thought immediately to myself, I've never heard of this secret group, and the only Wise Men's Club I've ever run across is the 3 wise men of the Bible that followed the star that led to Bethlehem, Iranians. And the birth of the Savior was their anticipated destination, as the King James Version of the Bible calls them. So I started doing some digging on this Wise Men's Club. What I found's next on Talk Radio AM 640. It's a Spaceman. Back with more after this. I'm a Spaceman. It's a view from space. Talk Radio AM 640. Emails to spaceman at 640toronto.com or space at 640toronto.com. And I thank you for the one that you have sent me. I really appreciate them. I really do. So as I was doing a little digging on the 3 wise men of the Bible, it was the only one that I had ever heard of a neat little club known as the Wise Men. But lo and behold, I find out that John Kerry is actually one of the 6 wise men of the world. From a book. Here's what I found out on a little research down that road. As it turns out, to my surprise, there's actually a book, one book, written about these guys, but just one. It was written by Walter Isaacson and Evan Thomas in 1986. Walter Isaacson used to run CNN. He also is now at the Aspen Institute in Aspen, Colorado, which is basically the brainwashing capital of America, and is putting out the propaganda and the correct story to tell, this correct Illuminati story to tell on the mass media. That's Walter Isaacson's job after running CNN. Now he's running all the Illuminati-controlled mass media outlets by giving them the stories on which to run and what take they are to have. Because he's a brainwasher. That's what Tavistock does for the world. Walter Isaacson is one of their puppets in America, that is in the Aspen Institute, which is doing exactly what Tavistock does to the world. The Aspen Institute performs that duty to America. The book's title that Isaacson and his sidekick Evan Thomas wrote is called The Wise Men, Six Friends, and the World They Made. It describes the actions of a group of the United States government officials and members of the East Coast foreign policy establishment who, beginning in the late 40s after World War II, that pitted the democratic system to fight the communistic system, this group of men invented the huge, powerful global institutions and initiatives like NATO, the World Bank, the Marshall Plan. Now, the Marshall Plan was the American program, remember, to help rebuild Europe. Buy American dollars, buy American bonds, and build your country back up again. That's what made America an empire. Everyone having to, forcing them to buy American bonds. The United States gave economic support to help rebuild the devastated European economies after World War II. The plan was to create a new enemy after Nazism. The U.S. became the defender of the world to prevent this spread of the new threat, Russia, the Soviet communist world. The newly created enemy after World War II, to keep the global population in fear in order to control you. World War II did a great job in doing that before that. The plan was in operation for 4 years. Beginning in April of 1948, the goals of the states were to rebuild a war-devastated region, remove trade barriers, modernize industry, and make Europe prosperous again, all through borrowing American dollars only. That's how the empire was built. The name equivalent to the Marshall Plan is often used to describe the proposed large-scale rescue program for the world. The Marshall Plan was named after the then Secretary of State George Marshall. By the way, an updated edition of this book was released I would say 2 years ago now. It sure didn't appear in the New York Times bestseller list, did it? The Six Wise Men that make up the title of this almost unknown book are Dean Acheson, who held John Kerry's position then as Secretary of State under President Harry Truman, and Charles Bolin, U.S. Ambassador to the Soviet Union, the Philippines, and also France at one time. And the third man was the very high-ranking Illuminati member, Special Envoy for President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Mr. W. Averell Harriman. The fourth member of the Six Wise Men were George Kennan, Ambassador to the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia, which no longer exists. Number 5 was Robert Lovett, Truman's Secretary of Defense, and the final and sixth, the number of man for the wise men of the world, was John McCloy, a War Department official and later U.S. High Commissioner for Germany. All the key players. Notice the economy that was eventually to become the strongest economy in the world, Germany, as we know it today, was where he was the ambassador. These 6 friends, a couple of lawyers, a couple of bankers, and 2 diplomats, were the Illuminati's most important foreign policy advisors to 5 consecutive U.S. presidents. They covered a span of 36 years. Yes, a 9 in numerology, the egotistical number that always returns to itself. Lucifer's favorite number. 36 years, the same 6 men running the show. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, 32nd President Lyndon Johnson. That's how far it went. It covers the period from 1933 all the way to 1969. To give you an idea of the closeness of these so-called gods of this world, they're considered gods by the Illuminati since they are calling the shots for the world and where we're all headed. Atchison, Harriman, Lovett, who were the core gods of this group, knew each other since their days at prep school and college when they were on Wall Street. The other three, Boland, Kennan, and McCloy, were younger men and didn't personally know the other controlling three very well until their public lives brought them into close contact. The entire group, all six, were pitted together when Harry Truman became President of the United States from 1945, right at the end of World War II, and was given the foreign policy advice by these men. They created a foreign policy based on resistance to the expansion of Soviet power. That was the new enemy to create the fear. So remember now, we're on our way to transforming the world through chaos to a one-world government. And it has to keep going. Essentially, it pitted communist against democracy to create the chaos. They were the hidden architects behind the Truman Doctrine, the Marshall Plan, and the Cold War. All of it. Kennan was seen as the go-to guy in ways to make sure communism didn't spread to other countries. Money, soldiers is what that takes. He was considered the father of containment by the other five guys on the team. The book, The Wise Men, Six Friends and the World They Made, portrays them as the perfect statesmen because they pushed the Illuminati agenda, which was the formation of a one-world government, period. These men were against any organized religion, except for Luciferianism, and they tended to be practical, realistic, and non-ideological. As I've stated many times on AVFS, on Talk Radio, AM 640, and that is that the Illuminati are going to make World War III, the Royal War III, an ideological war. A war that divides the people of the world into deciding just who God is. It'll be an ideological war. You can already see it today. It's building up toward that end. The Syrian crisis, ISIS. It's a huge step in that direction. This, along with the Ukraine, pitting Russia as the big enemy of the West. The makings of World War III. John Kerry knows the plan. It's the ruse needed to set up the coming global confrontation between Russia and the United States of America. Russia is going to be America's enemy again. This book called The Wise Men, Six Friends and the World They Made, written by, as I've already mentioned, Walter Isaacson. Walter Isaacson, educated in America, then later attended the University of Oxford in England, of course, as a Rhodes Scholar at Pembroke College. Yes, of course, he's a Rhodes Scholar. Rhodes Scholars, you may or may not be aware, maybe listening to this show for the first time, are the hand-picked bloodline members of the elite families who are maneuvered into very high positions of law and government and other high, powerful, influential jobs that will aid and abet the pushing of this Illuminati global plan agenda. Today, Walter Isaacson's job is listed as American writer and biographer, but that's not the job that he really holds and does for the Illuminati. He's also the president and CEO of the Aspen Institute, as I said, a brainwashing center. It sounds benign, I know, but it isn't. It's feeding all of the Illuminati-controlled mass media in America their agenda. Space, back with more. Flip side of this break on Talk Radio AM 640. I'm the guy they call the Spaceman. It's a view from space. It's Talk Radio, AM 640. You got some information you'd like to pass along? Or do you maybe have a critique of the show? Or just like to say where in the world you're listening to AVFS on Talk Radio, AM 640 from? Email me at space640toronto.com or spaceman at 640toronto.com. So the writer of the book, a very intriguing name, The Six Wise Men, and the World They Made. Written by Walter Isaacson, now the Aspen Institute's CEO and chairman. And Evan Thomas, well, he was merely helping the alpha male here in Walter Isaacson. But Thomas has been ensconced in the propaganda media as the assistant managing editor at Newsweek at one time. And these guys have been hanging around each other for a long time. They know each other very, very well. Where's Evan Thomas now, today? He's teaching journalism at Princeton University. If you watch the weekly public affairs television show called Inside Washington, you've definitely seen him. He's a regular panelist on that propaganda show. Of the six wise men, William Averill Harriman, who died in 1986, was an American Democratic Party politician, businessman, diplomat. He was the son of the railroad baron E.H. Harriman, served as Secretary of Commerce under Harry Truman, later the 48th governor of New York. Oh, very high up. Oh yeah, very key positions, all of them. And he was the point man. Harriman was the point man for U.S. diplomatic assignments in the Kennedy and Johnson administrations, both of them. You see, on decisions made by U.S. presidents, the presidents don't really make them. That's another lie believed by millions. They are the decisions of the Illuminati. They deliver the messages via their six wise men. Harriman, in this case, was the core member of the group foreign policy elders known as the wise men. Using money from his father, who, by the way, helped fund and raise up the Nazis, I'm serious, when they were in Wall Street. It can't be denied. The proof is there. And Harriman is well known in some circles as supporting on behalf of the State Department the coup against the then Vietnamese President Ngo Dinh Diem in 1963. Even Lyndon Johnson admitted as much, that he was complicit in on the assassination. And Jack Kennedy set him up as ambassador at large to operate in JFK's own words, with the full confidence of the president and an intimate knowledge of all aspects of United States policy. By 1963, Harriman was running Vietnam without even consulting the President of the United States or even the Attorney General. It was then a lot of people believe that John Kennedy started to suspect that not everyone in his national security team was very loyal to him. As one aide put it, Kenny O'Donnell, JFK's appointments secretary, was convinced that George Bundy, the national security advisor then, was taking orders from Harriman and not Kennedy, the president. Now, Harriman is involved with the Vanderbilts, the Whitneys. John Kerry married the heiress to the Heinz 57 Variety Corporation, Teresa Simos Vieira. This was after Henry Heinz died in a helicopter crash, of course. Teresa Simos Vieira, Kerry's real name is of Portuguese extraction, by the way. She's part Italian, part Swiss, part German, and part French. She's Illuminati bloodline. Oh, for sure. And John Kerry? John Kerry, actually, that's not his real name. His real name is Cohen. His grandparents, Frederick Carey, shoe merchant, by the way, was born Fritz Cohen at Beneš in Austria, which is now a part of Czechoslovakia. The birth records, Catholic birth records of the Beneš parish show he was baptized along with his wife and his infant son Eric at the church there in Modling in Austria. But later on, I believe it was in 1901, December 17th of 1901, here it is, the Austrian Statthalterei in Vienna was notified that the name Cohen wished to be officially changed to Carey, at which time Fritz was listed as being born in Beneš but originating from Freudenthal and currently working as a supplier for a shoe factory in Modling. The name change was ordered in, well, when this area that's now Czechoslovakia was an Austrian province. And then they immigrated to America in 1907. And from there, I have his lineage going back more than 11 generations. And there's England and Scotland in there, along with Czechoslovakia. But John Kerry is of Hebrew extraction. He is a Kabbalist. And that's why he has the job that he has. And that's why he seems to have or live in like this hotel in the sky. He's always flying to meetings to make peace deals, isn't he? That's what it seems like anyway. As soon as he's finished one talks and say the Ukraine, he's off to Syria, and then he's off to talk with the Saudis, and then he just has an itinerary that would tire any man out. You would have to be a Superman, a god, to be able to do all the things he says he does. No, he's a message deliverer of things like where to get your money, what bank accounts, things that you can't pass along via any other communicative way except for face-to-face for fear of being compromised, someone finding out or listening or finding out. Now, this is all very, very, very discreet. The six wise men. Men like Clark Clifford, James A. Baker III today, and former President George W. Bush are sometimes evaluated by comparing them to these wise men I just told you about. These men, I believe, are today's replacements for that original six that were assembled together back in the late 40s, mid to late 40s. And we've just learned from the Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sergei Lavrov, who spoke very highly of John Kerry, tells you that they're working close together, and indeed John Kerry is now currently a member of that exclusive secret society known as the Six Wise Men, and they are having talks to try and heal the rift between Russia and America. I'll tell you, it won't happen. America is going to have her old enemy back, Russia. You're obviously familiar with James Baker III and George W. Bush, but what about this man known as Clark Clifford? Well, let me offer you this. because he's involved with some mighty big underhanded corruption, as you might have already guessed, since he was one of the so-called recent 6 wise men. Clark Clifford was an American lawyer who served the United States Presidents Harry S. Truman, John Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, Jimmy Carter, serving as United States Secretary of Defense for Johnson in his later years. And then Clifford becomes involved in several controversies. He's a key figure in the Bank of Credit and Commerce International scandal, which led to a grand jury indictment. Clifford's memoirs, counsel to the president, co-authored by Richard Holbrooke, by the way, who later became the U.S. ambassador to the United States and the United Nations, were published just as his name was being implicated in the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, BCCI scandal. Covered here, by the way, when it went down on AVFS on Talk Radio AM 640 a few years ago. Yeah, Phil recall the scandal focused on the criminal contact of this international bank and its control of financial institutions right across America. The bank was founded by the regulators in the U.S. and the United Kingdom, of course, to be involved in money laundering, bribery, support of terrorism, arms trafficking, the sale of nuclear technologies, the commission and facilitation of tax evasion, smuggling, illegal immigration, the illicit purchases of banks and real estate. The bank was found to have at least $13 billion in unaccounted for funds. It's dirty money. Because you see, the Illuminati have dirty ways to do their dirty deeds with their dirty money. The 6 wise men, a club today that's running the world, that actually are the messengers, I should say. The top elite bloodline family members are making the decisions at the top. These are their gopher boys. Space back with more. Flip side of this break on Talk Radio AM 640. I'm the Spaceman. This is a view from space. Like to communicate with me? I do it by one way only, and that is by email, spaceman at 640toronto.com. One address, the other space at 640toronto.com. Got a small cyber footprint. Very tiny. I have no Twitter account. I have no website. I have no Facebook account. I don't have a cell phone. I prefer the real world. I only look into screens when I need it for the job. SR writes, one of the 6 wise men you mentioned, John McCloy. John McCloy was one of the members of the infamous Warren Commission who allegedly investigated the assassination of John Kennedy. They have to control the outcomes of their crimes in which they commit. Awful lot of Freemasons on the Warren Commission. Signed SR. Oh, if you care to look into it, they don't even care if you see the proof and understand and know what's going on, because you can't do anything about it. You're powerless. They have the power. They are above the law. No, they are above the law. The law is not for the elite rich. It's for you and I to keep us out of their realm. Now, as I've already mentioned to you earlier in the show, that Prince Charles and the Duchess of Cornwall, Camilla, were once again on the move this week during this very important, spiritually potent week we've just experienced. If you'll notice, you'll find these two, Prince Charles and Camilla, on the move in attendance during all major celestial events, like the ones we've just been through this week. The solar eclipse, with the supermoon, and the spring equinox, all happening on the same exact day. Oh my. It not only seems like Prince Charles and Camilla are always in attendance and always appear at the same location to witness these celestial occurrences, because they always are. No matter where on Earth it's seen from, they journey there. This past heavenly triple whammy with the incredible solar eclipse, the supermoon, which is a new moon, by the way, and the spring equinox, all in one. It is truly magical for them. A solar eclipse, you see, can be seen as a very powerful new moon. And that's what the moon was when it obfuscated, covered up the sun as seen from Earth here on Friday. New moons represent, in the occult, new starts, fresh beginnings, going over all of the old things, finding out where you are now, and planning the new future, the next step, if you like. It's this perfect time to work magic. And that's what they were doing. It can be likened to you being a caterpillar that will willfully enter into your cocoon of contemplation. You remember your old self, as I said, your thoughts you made and the actions that these thoughts led you to take in the past. And you have all the ideas about yourself, who you want to be, and what you want to do with your future, your world in this case. All these ideas, thoughts, the past, present, future, coexist during this stage of a solar eclipse with the new moon. The solar eclipse gives the power, the occultist believes, when you are ready to break this cocoon, and will give you the boost to completely transform into a new form, which of course would be the butterfly. Hence, the solar eclipse is the perfect timing for a metamorphosis, a transcendence to a new state of being. I'm talking about the world here now. Cutting down all the restraints that were once binding, and giving you the breeze to flap your wings and fly, to explore the world with a new set of wise eyes. A solar eclipse is often described in the occult, in the alchemical world, and occult texts as the alchemical wedding where the sun marries the moon. A perfect balance. Only this time, last night, the moon representing the woman and the sun representing man had sex. They were on top of one another. And a ritual, of course, was being done below. I firmly believe that's what was happening. This total eclipse, by the way, with Prince Charles and the Duchess of Cornwall, Camilla, visiting Europe, was not visible anywhere in the USA at all, and was only seen by people on a group of very remote islands in the North Atlantic called the Faroe Islands. Islands. Get it? As in the Egyptian Pharaoh? The Faroe Islands. These Faroe Islands are spelled Faroe, not Faroaoh, as in Osiris. But amazing, isn't it, that it's the Faroe Islands, a group in far northern Europe, located between Norwegian Sea and the North Atlantic Ocean, just about halfway between Norway and Iceland, about 300 clicks northwest of mainland Scotland. Residents of this Danish-owned Faroe Islands and the sparsely inhabited Norwegian island group of Svalbard were the only ones in the whole world to view this full spectacle. I tell you right now, while Prince Charles and Camilla were in America, they took an airplane on Friday, and they were in the Faroe Islands. And after that spiritual, celestial event was going down, Prince Charles and Camilla in attendance, the ritual was performed. I can guarantee you that. More about that when I come back on the other side of the break on Talk Radio AM 640. I'm Space. That'll be me. I'm the Spaceman. It's Talk Radio AM 640. I only communicate by one way, and that's the email system. Space at 640toronto.com. Spaceman at 640toronto.com. Thanks for the one you sent me. M writes, I'm connected once again. I can't really figure it out. Where you get the courage of exposing things about the elite, the Illuminatis, and some hard-to-touch personalities. Is your life not in danger in doing so? But I'm always interested in your topics. It's just a radio show that is in the middle of the night, and its start time changes. Hardly a threat. SB writes, hello again. 4th of April. There's a blood moon and a lunar eclipse. This is a magic day. Yeah, I'll be on about that when it gets here. Absolutely. This is an unprecedented year in blood moons, and where these blood moons actually fall, because it goes back to, well, ancient Israel falling on the Jewish holidays throughout the year this year. But the only solar eclipse was last night. And I am sure, as I said, that Camilla Parker Bowles and her husband, Prince Charles, the Prince of Wales, were present in the Faroe Islands. That group of islands, the only place in the world where you can see the entire full spectacle. They were there. They don't miss these events because they are the high priest and priestess that conduct the rituals performed under these auspicious celestial events. After the spiritual ritual has been conducted by the elites, it's then made manifest in the physical world. I believe this latest triple celestial event has something to do with the United States directly. That's why Prince Charles and Camilla were visiting the U.S. and scheduled their visit at that particular time. leading up to the incredible celestial showcase of this week. The black magic created in this spell cast underneath this celestial event is then loosed into the world, manifest into the world physically by Clarence House. That's the business office of the Prince of Wales, who tells the 6 wise men what to do. Clarence House calls all the shots in the geopolitical arena here on Earth. High-level black magic has been created this week, and the seeds have now been planted in the spirit world, involving Iran, Syria, America, Israel, and Russia. The harvest coming from those events are to come soon. Only time will tell what the outcome is. But let me just take you back to the Queen's Golden Jubilee year of 2012, where there was another occurrence of a solar eclipse that was so revealing. I should revisit it tonight, I thought. Prince Charles and Camilla were definitely in attendance. You see, you're about to hear the true meaning of J.R.R. Tolkien's books and movies based on those books, and the Illuminati's plan, and these high-profile priest and priestess, Prince Charles and Camilla, jetting around the world, hitting all of these celestial events with the magical rituals performing underneath of that event in the heavens. So it was a jam-packed itinerary for Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, and Camilla, that had them visiting Australia for a 3-day Aussie tour, the 3 days, same as America, before they headed to New Zealand and Papua New Guinea to mark the Queen's Diamond Jubilee. Well, at least that's what the official reason was. But in fact, it wasn't. There was many stops, many events crammed into just a few days on that tour, and I don't need to give the whole itinerary, just the very conspicuous visits. 2 in particular that I found very intriguing, to say the least. Just a quick 3 days into Australia, and they arrive in New Zealand, November 11th, visiting Auckland. The following day, the 12th, the royal number evoked there, they meet with film director Peter Jackson, who's on the set where the Lord of the Rings special effects were being made, and were given a world-exclusive sneak preview at this new movie, The Hobbit, the 3rd movie in Peter Jackson's new Hobbit trilogy being shot in New Zealand. It was shown July 18th, 2014, last year, released. After the visit to the set of The Lord of the Rings, Prince Charles and Camilla had a couple of days off, from November 13th to the 16th, actually 3 days off. It was billed as a private sightseeing by Cambridge House that directs all official movements of the royal family. A private sightseeing time, it was called. I wonder what sights they were seeing that were so interesting it had to be private. In other words, being removed from the peering eyes of the Illuminati-controlled mass media, with their whereabouts being unaccounted for. Sounds very intriguing, doesn't it? Well, it is. What if I told you I thought I knew where they went? I believe they were actually secreted back to Australia for the very reason this trip was planned in the first place, using the Queen's Jubilee as the official excuse. On November 14th, a tremendously rare celestial occurrence took place in Cairns, Australia. Well, let me just rehash their little break and when it came. Yes, there it is. November 14th, the rare celestial occurrence. And they had a private sightseeing time, 3 days, from the 13th of November to the 16th. The celestial occurrence, the eclipse, happened right smack in the middle, November 14th, of their November 13 to 16 private sightseeing. A tremendously rare celestial occurrence. Do you recall November 14th, back in 2012? Well, happening on the very same day as Prince Charles' 64th birthday, I might add. Cairns, by the way, is the northern area of Queensland in Australia. North is where God supposedly resides in the occult, you see. Where God resides, the only piece of land the eclipse actually eclipses totally, in the first solar eclipse to occur in that spot in 1,300 years. Just north of it lies the Cape of Tribulation, a mere 110 kilometers away. That's an 11, by the way, if you drop the zero. In 1770, James Cook first mapped the future site of Cairns, naming it Trinity Bay. During World War II, Cairns was used by the Allied forces as staging base for operations in the Pacific, with the U.S. Army Air Force, Royal Australian Air Force operational bases, now the airport, as well as a major military seaplane base in Trinity Inlet, and U.S. Navy and Royal Australian Navy bases near the wharf. That's there today. Combat missions were flown out of Cairns in support of the Battle of the Coral Sea in 1942. Edmonton and White Rock south of Cairns were major military supply areas, and the U.S. paratroopers trained at Gordonvale and the Goldsboro Valley. Now, you might have guessed what Cairns could be representing, especially if you're a regular listener to AVFS. Talk Radio AM 640. Although The Hobbit was originally planned to be a two-part film, Peter Jackson and MGM have confirmed plans that they were going to do a third and final episode to make it the trilogy in that very royal year of 2012. On, wait for it, you guessed it, the 30th. The royal number 3. According to Jackson, the third film would include the appendices that J.R.R. Tolkien himself wrote in the back of the Return to the King book to expand the story of Middle-earth. I wonder what that could be. The Illuminati will surely show you a glimpse of what's to come in our world. The real world we live in, after all. The movie industry exists for one purpose only, and that purpose is to brainwash the viewer via what's known as predictive programming. The synopsis of this final flick, coming up in just a minute. It's very revealing. I mean, very revealing. It's the same message as the Bond movie Skyfall had. Well, it would have to be, wouldn't it? The first and second films of this Hobbit trilogy were shot back-to-back in New Zealand and are still in post-production. Principally, photography began on the 21st of March 2011 and ended in July of 2012. While the third film pretty much made use of footage originally shot for the first and second flicks. I'm told it would also require some additional filming as well. So in July 2012, Mark Monitor registered a handful of domain names centered around the word riddles and phrases in the dark, the Battle of Five Armies, and the Desolation of Smog, suggesting that these were possible titles being considered for at least one of J.R.R. Tolkien's flicks, directed by Peter Jackson. More on this when I return on the other side of this break. It's Talk Radio, AM 640, I'm Space. I'm the guy to call Space. It's a View from Space. Emails to spaceman at 640toronto.com or space at 640toronto.com. Thank you so much for the ones that you sent. I really appreciate it. I just want to say hi to EM in Saskatchewan. I thank you so much for the one that you've sent me. Now, as I left off before, the second movie was renamed The Desolation of Smog, and the third film was given the name There and Back Again at the time of the London Olympiad in August of 2012. There and Back Again was scheduled for release on July 18th last year, 2014, just before the big year I talk about a lot. This one, the one we're in now, 2015. Reasons? Queen Elizabeth II will have surpassed her great-great-great-grandmother, Queen Victoria, and claim the record of longest-serving British monarch of all time. I believe she then steps aside when she takes that record for herself and is hers alone for the new king. And the biggest role-playing countries are all having elections. Great Britain, coming up in May 7th, the Brits go to the polls. The Scots already held their referendum on separation. The United States has another election as well as Canada, October 19th. And the troops are supposedly pulling out of Afghanistan, which I don't believe will ever happen. Ratcheting it up, I believe, will happen. And Queen Elizabeth, by the way, this year will become the longest-serving British monarch all time, almost at the end of this year in September. So the changes with the monarchy could happen in 2016. All depends on what goes down in the next few months. This is huge. Now, Osiris was the first sun god of the ancient Egyptian mystery religion, as you know. Osiris was, of course, a black man, a black god. The solar eclipse was a symbol of all of this in Cairns, Australia. In 2012, the second sun that's going to be appearing in our sky for the world to see. So here's the plot for the third flick that we're showing to you. It's called There and Back Again. Local Shire hobbit Bilbo Baggins, uncle of Frodo Baggins, is living in a quiet, peaceful life until Gandalf the Grey knocks on his door, and a band of wandering dwarves shows up, one or two at a time. The goal? To hire poor Bilbo Baggins for a quest. As a burglar that entails defeating a dragon and burgling a treasure. Along the way, there are adventures with trolls, of course, elves, a battle of goblins, the naming of Bilbo's sword as Sting after a battle with some spiders escaping from wargs, and a barrel ride in a river. Then there's a great epic battle, the Battle of Five Armies, it's called, which includes men, dwarves, elves, goblins, wargs, and more. Most important of all, part of the story leads Bilbo into riddles in the dark, where he meets Gollum, and in the process acquires a peculiar ring that has had and will have a great impact on the future of the world. just as the plans the Illuminati have for you and I, staging the battle in the Middle East, not Middle Earth, Middle East, that draws all countries of the world to it. The battle of the ages I'm talking about. The King James Version of the Bible states it. And the Illuminati are going to follow the King James Version of the Bible to the letter. After all, it's a Christian battle now on who God is. And that's why they're going to follow it to the letter. It's the plan. Now, the Middle East has become a powder keg once again, and this comes immediately before the U.S. election. Coincidence? I don't think so. All of this is all breaking simultaneously. Prince Charles, Prince of Wales, the dragon, and the Camilla, the Duchess of Cornwall. I'm positive we're holding some sort of black magic ritual as the total eclipse of the sun was happening over Cairns, Australia that day. The BBC headline beamed around the world on Eclipse Day. Prince Charles in Middle-earth. So they held the grand ritual with the eclipsed sun, a symbol, by the way, of the Antichrist, the eclipsed sun. The ABC logo for the ABC television network is an actual eclipsed sun. Yes, it is all being done in the spirit world first, then manifested physically in our world. I'm positive Camilla and Prince Charles were holding some sort of black magic ritual as the total eclipse of the sun was happening in Cairns that day. Middle-earth, in the world of John Ronald Reuel Tolkien's Hobbit world, is the name used for the habitable parts of Arda. Middle-earth's setting in a period in Earth's own past. How J.R.R. Tolkien wrote his books. Tolkien, in one of his letters, estimated the end of the Third Age to be about 6,000 years before his own time. But many facts about the Hobbit have been altered over and over again. I believe so as to create confusion. The action of the books is pretty much confined to the northwest of the Endor continent, which is modern-day Europe. That's one fact that hasn't been changed. The history of Middle-earth is divided into several ages. The Hobbit, the main text of the Lord of the Rings, deals exclusively with events towards the end of the Third Age and ends at the dawn of the Fourth Age, while the Silmarillion deals mainly with the First Age. The world known as Arda was originally flat, but was made round near the edge, or the end of the Second Age by Uru Luvadar, the creator. Just like our world, right? Where it started out as everyone thinking it was flat. There was the Flat Earth Society, even afterwards, that insisted it was flat, even though there was evidence produced to make it a round Earth. So, where Plato and Aristotle, along with the rest of the world's population, believed the world was flat, then Copernicus and Galileo sort of proved it was not flat, but round. Middle-earth, a literal translation of the Old English word Midgard, referring to this world and the habitable lands of men. Tolkien translated Middle-earth as Endor, the north of Endor became the Eurasian landmass, and the primitive Earth was transformed into the round world of today. Most of the knowledge of Middle-earth is based on writings that J.R.R. Tolkien did not finish for publication during his lifetime, so naturally there's been a lot of controversy over what's seen as Tolkien's work, and others who have obviously added to it. The words Middle-earth, for instance, weren't originally thought up by Tolkien at all, but that word did exist in Old English as Middengird, as I said, and in Middle English, and Midden-Erd or Middle-Erd, in the Old Norse occult religion, closely followed by the Illuminati, it was called Midgard. And it's the English for what the Greeks called the abiding place of men, the physical world as opposed to the unseen worlds. The word Mediterranean comes from a couple of Latin roots. Midi, meaning amidst, and terra, of course, meaning earth or land. Put it all together and you're left with the sea placed in the middle of the earth, amidst the lands. Middengird occurs a half a dozen or maybe 6 times in Beowulf, that incredibly long Anglo-Saxon piece of literature, which Tolkien translated and which most researchers say he was the world's foremost authority on. Beowulf, you see, has been mentioned many times on this radio show, AVFS, Talk Radio AM 640. It's known as one of the more important works of Anglo-Saxon literature. It's actually hailed as the most important because it's about Satan. It was even done in a movie, and Angelina Jolie played Beowulf. It survives in a single manuscript known as the Noel Codex. It's composition by an anonymous Anglo-Saxon poet, we're told, and is dated between the 8th and the early 11th century. Notice the numbers: 8 and 11. And as far as the star of that show, Beowulf, Angelina Jolie, she's a member of the bloodline of Cain. That's why she was chosen to have the lead role. Back with more on the other side of this break on Talk Radio AM 640. I'm the Spaceman. Gotta be me. I'm the Spaceman. It's Talk Radio AM 640. There's only one way you can communicate with me. It's through the email system. It's space@640toronto.com, one address. The other, spaceman at 640toronto.com. And DM writes in the subject line, "Hi from Dubai. Hi, Space, listening from the boarding gate. About to start work in Kabul. A 40-day tour. Best regards, DM." I appreciate anywhere in the world you're listening to me. And encourage your emails. Just if you like to say hi. You don't need to supply me with things you might know or have seen. But I really appreciate them and I thank you for them. So as I was saying before the break, Angelina Jolie, the star of the movie Beowulf. And Middengird in J.R.R. Tolkien's books mentioned half a dozen times in Beowulf. The actual writing, the Anglo-Saxon literature piece, the poem, Beowulf. It survives in a single manuscript known as the Noel Codex, supposedly written by an anonymous Anglo-Saxon poet, dated between the 8th and 11th century. And Angelina Jolie played Beowulf. She's a member of the bloodline of Cain. That's why she got the part. has to play the bloodline family member. The story is, of course, about Satan killing the great beast and saving the world, and that was the very first ever story. That's why it's hailed so much as the greatest piece of Anglo-Saxon literature, Beowulf, because it is the first ever story of Satan killing Satan and disguising himself as the savior of the world. And that's exactly what Beowulf does. The story is repeated incessantly. Satan killing Satan and disguising himself as the savior. You see what I mean when I say the Illuminati play both sides, control both sides. Before they get into a fight, or they won't get into the fight. Satan kills Satan, disguising himself as the savior. Same play. This story is repeated over and over. It's the origin in ancient writing of the Antichrist. That's why they call Beowulf one of the most important works of Anglo-Saxon literature. It's also the longest ever written. Forget War and Peace. Tolkien was wholly inspired by this particular statement from Beowulf. Translated into English, it goes, "Hail, Arundel, brightest of angels, above the middle earth, sent unto men." And we know who Arundel is. It's Lucifer. In the Christ poem of Cynewulf, the name Arundel, which means the morning star, see, Lucifer, but in some contexts was a name for Christ. It was actually the inspiration for Tolkien's Mariner Arundel. That character. The name was consciously used by Tolkien to place The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, the Silmarillion, and related writings. Tolkien began to use the word Middle Earth in the 1930s in place of the earlier word meaning great lands, or outer lands, hitherlands, to describe the area where his stories took place. Middle Earth is specifically intended to describe the lands east of the Great Sea, which excluded Aman, but included Harad and other mortal lands not visited in Tolkien's stories. And many people apply the name to the entirety of Tolkien's world, or exclusively to the lands described in The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, the Silmarillion. In ancient Germanic and Old Norse symbology and mythology, the universe was believed to consist of 9 physical worlds joined together. I know, Satan's favorite number. The world of men, 1. The Middle Earth was located in the center of this universe. The land of elves, gods, and giants was across an encircling sea. And the land of the dead lay beneath the Middle Earth. A rainbow bridge, Bifrost Bridge as it was called, extended from Middle Earth to Asgard across the sea. An outer sea encircled the 7 other worlds, of which Asgard was one. In this conception, a world was actually a racial homeland, not another physically separate world. Tolkien stated that the geography of Middle Earth was intended to align with our real Earth in many ways. Some researchers on the subject even suggest that if the map of Middle Earth is actually projected onto our real Earth, and some of the most obvious climatological, botanical, zoological similarities are aligned, the Hobbit Shire might lie smack dab where England's located. Gondor is the Mediterranean area, including Italy and Greece. Mordor is in reality the country of Turkey, who, by the way, figure prominently in the Illuminati chaos created in Syria. The Middle East is South Gondor and near Harad in Libya. That's Libya. Tunisia, Somalia, Algeria, and Morocco. That's the Middle East. It's South Gondor, according to J.R.R. Tolkien's trilogy of where the Earth is going. Where our future is. J.R.R. Tolkien is brainwashing people into this scenario. Rovanian is in fact a Germany and steppes of the western and southern Russia, and the ice bay of Ferochai is none other than Norway. The recent sight of Anders Breivik and that chaos that he created, shooting all those school children on that island, the land of Far Harad, South Africa, and Ruan is Russia, east of the Ural Mountains in Central Asia. Yes, you see, Tolkien took the real world and what was to come in the real world and wrote his Lord of the Rings trilogy, which is, of course, one king, one rule, one earth. Now, The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings are presented as Tolkien's retelling of events depicted in the Red Book of Westmarch, which was written by Bilbo Baggins, Frodo Baggins, and other hobbits, and corrected and explained by one or more of the Gondorian scholars, like Shakespeare's King Lear or Robert E. Howard's Conan the Barbarian stories. The stories take place in an historical period that did, in fact, actually exist. That's why there's more predictive programming on this subject coming out in the new Conan the Barbarian movie that's coming out. Arnold Schwarzenegger, a member of the Bloodline, reprising his role as Conan and the barbarian that he is. Dates for the length of the year and the phases of the moon, along with the descriptions, constellations, firmly fixed the world as Earth, no more than several thousand years ago. Years after publication, Tolkien mentions in a letter one time that the action of the books happened to be about 6,000 years ago, although he wasn't quite certain about that. Tolkien also wrote a lot about linguistics, mythology, and history of the world, which provides a huge backstory for his stories. And a lot of these writings were edited and published after he died by his son Christopher Tolkien, by the way. And most famous among them is the Silmarillion, which is the Bible-like creation story and description of the science of the origin and development of the universe, which includes Middle-earth. Yeah, the actual creation of Earth and mankind. The Silmarillion is the most famous, foremost source of information about Valinor, Numenor, and other lands. There's also many unfinished stories in multiple volumes of the history of Middle-earth, of which includes a lot of incomplete stories and essays, as well as drafts of John Tolkien's Middle-earth mythology, all the way from his earliest forms right down through the last writings of his life. I've got more on the Middle-earth and what the Illuminati has planned and is embedded in those stories. Next on Talk Radio AM 640. I'm the guy to call Space. It's a View from Space. Talk Radio AM 640. Emails to spaceman at 640toronto.com or space at 640toronto.com. J.R.R. Tolkien wrote his stories that are now made into movies because the Illuminati want to program you for what is to come, because I believe that the fantasy is in the newscasts that you see the news, and the truth is in the movies. So Tolkien wrote a lot about linguistics and mythology and in even history of the world. And his son did a little editing and did the publishing after he died, his son Christopher. And most famous among them is the Silmarillion, which is like a Bible-like creation story, and the description of the science of the origin and development of the universe, which includes Middle-earth. The Silmarillion is the foremost source of information about Valinor, Numenor, and other lands. There's also a lot of other unfinished stories and multiple volumes of the history of Middle-earth, of which includes many incomplete stories, essays, as well as drafts. And Tolkien's Middle-earth mythology, all the way from the earliest forms right down through to the last writings of his life, were engaged on this, or the topics that I have just cited to you: mythology, history of the world, and linguistics. Doesn't this Silmarillion, though, this Bible-like creation stories, sound a lot like the Bible format? Just listen. The supreme deity is called Eru Luvatar. In the beginning, Luvatar creates spirits called the Ainur, and he taught them to make music. After the Ainur had become proficient in their skills, Luvatar commands them to make a great music based on a theme of his own design. The most powerful Ainu, named Melkor, later called Morgoth, or Dark Enemy by the elves, Tolkien's equivalent of Satan, disrupts the theme. And in response, Luvatar introduces new themes that enhance the music beyond the comprehension of the Ainur. The movements of the song laid their seeds of much of the history as to the as yet unmade universe and the people who were to live there. In a word, you and I, us. Then Luvatar stops the music, and he revealed his meaning to the Ainur, the angels, through a vision. Moved by that vision, many of the angels, or the Ainur, as Tolkien calls them in his book, felt a compelling urge to experience its events directly. Luvatar therefore creates Ea, the universe itself. And some of the Ainur, angels, went down into the universe to share the experience. But upon arriving in Ea, Earth, the Ainur, angels, found it was shapeless because they'd entered at the beginning of time. The Ainur then work extremely hard in their unnamed ages of the stars, in which they shape the universe and fill it with many things far beyond the reach of man. But in time, the Ainur, or the angels, finally completed Arda, the abiding place of the children of Luvatar. God's children, elves and men. The 15 most powerful Ainur, or angels, were called the Valar. The greatest of these was Melkor. He was the most powerful. But Manwë was the leader. The Valar, or archangels, settled in Arda to watch over it and to help prepare it for the awakening of the children. You and I, people, humans, just like the Antichrist, will try to replicate when he takes full control of the earth. Enlightenment from the angel of light, his possessor, Lucifer, known as the angel of light, will try to, awaken the children, us. Arda began as a single flat world, which the Valar, an archangel, gave light to through two immense lamps. The most powerful archangel, Melkor, was said to have destroyed the lamps and brought darkness to the world. The Valar then retreated to the extreme western regions of Arda, where they created the two trees to give light to their new homeland. The Tree of Life, and the Tree of Good and Evil, of course, in the King James Version of the Bible. That's exactly where Tolkien got it from. And after many ages passed by, the Valar imprisoned Melkor to punish and rehabilitate him, and to protect the awakening children. You and I, us, the humans. But when Melkor was released on parole, he poisoned the two trees. The Valar then took the last two living fruit of the two trees and used them up to create the moon and the sun, which remains a part of Arda, but were separate from Ambar, meaning the world. Before the end of the Second Age, when the men of Numenor rebel against the Valar, Luvatar, the creator, destroys Numenor, separated Valinor from the rest of Arda, and formed new lands, making the world round. Only Endor remained of the original world, and Endor have now become Eurasia. You see the transforming of the world there in the Second Age? In J.R.R. Tolkien's life, he never finalized the geography for the entire world associated with The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. In The Shaping of the Middle-earth, Volume 4, in the history of Middle-earth, his son Christopher Tolkien published some maps, both the original flat Earth and also the new Earth, meaning the round world, that his father created in the late 1930s. Later, a woman by the name of Karen Wynne Fonstadt used these maps to develop detailed whole world maps reflecting a world consistent with the historical ages that are depicted in this Silmarillion I'm talking about, this Bible-based, Bible-sounding story by Tolkien. The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings author. But it wasn't what Tolkien came up with originally, this Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings books. No, maps done by Tolkien's son Christopher Tolkien or J.R.R. Tolkien for the world depicted in The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings were published as foldouts or illustrations in The Hobbit. The Lord of the Rings with the Silmarillion. Early conceptions of the maps provided the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings were included in several volumes. Yon Map, Shaping of Middle-earth, the first map of the Lord of the Rings, and the Treason of Isengard. And there are more, which I'll tell you about on the other side. It's Talk Radio AM 640 M Space. This is AVFS. I'm the guy to call Space. It's a View from Space and Talk Radio AM 640. Emails to space at 640toronto.com or spaceman at 640toronto.com. Thanks for the ones you sent me. I really appreciate it. Let me return to the Lord of the Rings. Surely the rings are jewelry here. No? Well, powerful jewelry at that, obviously belonging to you-know-who. Now, Endor, the word used for Middle-earth in an elven language originated by Tolkien, was in the beginning conceived in a plan ruined by Melkor, the Satan in Tolkien's world, by the way. There are two very large what you would call, well, worlds, subcontinents, we could call them. One in the north, one in the south. Each one had a mountain chain. The mountain chains were given the name White Mountains, Blue Mountains, Gray Mountains, and Red Mountains. And the many battles waged against the evil Melkor, the archangel, resulted in shapes of the lands being distorted. Originally, there was a single inland body of water, going back to the days of Atlantis here, in the midst of which was set the island of Almarin, which I believe is Atlantis, where the Valar, archangels of the good god Luvatar, lived. When Melkor destroyed the lamps which gave light to the world of these archangels, all of a sudden 2 vast seas were created. In other words, after the lights went out, the earth was suddenly changed. As in the great flood in the Bible, the northern sea became the Sea of Helker. The lands of the west of the Blue Mountains became Beleriand, the meaning of the land of Balar. The evil Melkor raised the misty mountains to block the progress of Valar, archangel, called Orom, as he hunted Melkor's beasts during the period of darkness prior to the awakening of the elves. This is the historic Dark Ages in world history. Other changes also occurred when the archangels of the good god Luvatar attacked Utumno, the northwest of the Middle-earth, where Melkor met the Valar host. It was much broken. The sea between the Middle-earth and Aman widened, with many bays created, including one that was the confluence of the Sirion River. That's another name for Mount Hermon in our world. The mountain has been known as Baal, Hermon, Sinir, Sirion, Sion. So you see how closely J.R.R. Tolkien stuck to our Earth in his make-believe world, which, is it make-believe or is it pre-programming and is going to happen? The violent struggles during the War of Wrath between the host of the Valar and the armies of Melkor at the end of the First Age brought about the destruction of Belerland. It's also possible that during this time the inland sea of Helkar was actually drained. The world was identified by Tolkien as the word Ambar in several texts, also identified as Imbar, the habitation. From the time of the destruction of the 2 lamps until the time of the downfall of Numenor, Ambar was supposed to be a flat world, meaning that its habitable land masses were all arranged on one side of the world. Tolkien's sketches show a disc-like face for the world which looked up to the stars, the constellations of which there are 88. A western continent, Aman, was the home of the Valar, the archangels, and the lower-ranked angels known as the Endor of the good god Luvatar. The Middlelands were called the Middle-earth, and the site of the most of Tolkien's stories. There were no peoples living in eastern continent on the Second Age. And when the archangel Melkor poisoned the 2 trees, the tree of life and tree of good and evil, of the Valar, and fled from Aman back to Endor, the Valar created the sun and the moon, which were separate bodies from Ambar, but still parts of Arda, the realm of the children of Luvatar. Now, according to accounts in both the Silmarillion, the Lord of the Rings, when our Pharazôn invaded Aman to seize immortality from the Valar again, the archangels They had laid down their guardianship of the world, and Luvatar intervened, destroying Numenor, removing Aman from the circles of the world, and reshaping Ambar, which is supposedly the Earth to Tolkien, into a round world of today. Middle-earth is the home of a few distinct intelligent species. They're the Ainur, the angelic beings created by Luvatar. The Ainur sing for Luvatar, who creates Ea to give existence to the music in the cosmological myth called the Ainulindale, or music of the Ainur. Some of the Ainur then enter Ea, and the greatest of these are called the Valar, archangels. Now, late in the Third Age, according to Tolkien, going into the history of the world and the future, the Uruks and Uruk-hai appear, a race of orcs of great size and strength. Some claim that by the end of the Third Age, the only Uruks properly called Uruk-hai are those serving Saruman. Saruman breeds orcs and men together to produce men-orcs and orc-men. At times, some of these are called half-orcs or goblin men. What we're doing is we're crossing gods and men. Spiritual beings with man, just like the King James Version of the Bible describes the Nephilim. Or aliens that had sex with human women, creating half men, half gods, whom are the Illuminati families, they believe. They believe that. J.R.R. Tolkien is laying it out in sort of a mystical, confused state of a trilogy of books, which is actually going into the future and telling you what this world is going to become. The character known as Tom Bombadil in Tolkien stories is an enigma. It's unknown to which people of Middle-earth he belongs to or comes from. He's obviously part animal and humanoid. See, he's a hybrid. Tolkien has said this, though, about Bombadil's nature. He said some things should remain mysterious in any mythology, hidden even to its inventor. I tell you now, he is a replica of Cain, part beast, Satan as the father, and part human mother Eve. Cain was the first hybrid ever. The word hybrid today is, well, getting more and more popular as time goes on. Here's this quick synopsis, history of Middle-earth, which is where our Earth is going. It's divided into 3 time periods known as the years of the lamps, the years of the trees, the years of the sun. After all, the last, fittingly, is called the sun, as in the eclipse, as I started tonight's show with on Talk Radio AM 640. They're sun worshippers. Imagine an eclipse that only touches one speck of land, a place called Cairns in Australia. And for the rest of the eclipse, it's only at sea, at a place that's not had an eclipse in 1,300 years. When I come back from the break, the first part of Middle-earth's history was called BT, as the Years of the Lamps by J.R.R. Tolkien. Back with more, the other side of this break on Talk Radio AM 640. I'm the guy to call Space. It's a View from Space. Talk Radio AM 640. Emails to Spaceman at 640toronto.com or space at 640toronto.com. G writes, Battle of Endor, Star Wars, Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. Hey, Space, Endor was the power source for the Dark Force, which the Jedi had to destroy in order to destroy the Dark Empire. Just thought I'd bring that to your attention. Thanks and regards, G. Oh yes, they all have the same story, because we're all headed to the same place, and they know it. They know the plan, and are programming through entertainment what's to come. Now, the first part of Middle-earth's history was called by Tolkien as the Years of the Lamps. It began shortly after the Valar, archangels of the good god Luvatar, finished their labors in shaping Arda. Arda is the Earth, the globe as we call it. But in the Years of the Lamp, it was flat, just like our Earth originally was believed to be. The Valar created two lamps to illuminate the world, and the Valar Ole forged great towers. One in the furthest north, Helkar, with the lamp Iluin, and another in the deepest south, Ringol, with the lamp of Ormal. The Valar lived in the middle, at the island of Almarin. Melkor's, Satan's, destruction of the two lamps marked the end of the years of the lamps. Then Yavanna made the two trees, named Telpurian and Laurelin, in the land of Armen. And the trees illuminated Armen, leaving the rest of Arda in darkness. What's that tell you? Well, part of the world is enlightened today, the West, as they would have you believe, and part is left in the dark. The East. Get it? The trees in Amen actually illuminated the place, leaving the rest of Arda in darkness. Illuminated only by the stars. At the start of the First Age, the elves woke beside Lake Kovinen in the east of Endor and were soon approached by the Valar. And many of the elves were persuaded to go on a great journey westward towards Amen. But not all of them completed the journey. Sounds like the Exodus out of Egypt, doesn't it? The Valar had imprisoned Melkor, but he appeared to repent and was released on parole. He pitted the elves against one another and stirred up rivalry between the elven princes named Fëanor and Fingolfin. Then he kills their father, King Finwë, and stole the Silmarils, the three gems crafted by Fëanor that contained the light of the two trees from his vault, and then destroyed the trees themselves. Fëanor then persuades most of his people, the Noldor, to leave Aman in pursuit of Melkor to Beleriand, cursing him with the name Morgoth, Satan. Fëanor led the first of two groups to Noldor. The large group is led by Fingolfin. Noldor stops at the Tellan's port city, Alqualond, but the Teleri refused to give them ships to get to Middle-earth. The first kinslaying then took place. Fëanor and many of his followers attacked the Teleri and stole their ships. Fëanor's host sailed on the stolen ships, leaving Fingolfin behind to cross over to Middle-earth through the deadly Helcarax, or grinding ice in the far north. Not long after Fëanor was slain, but most of his sons surviving founded realms, as did Fingolfin and his heirs. In other words, the bloodline survived, is what Tolkien's trying to say. The years of the sun begin then, when the Valar makes the sun and it rises over the world. Imbar. After many great battles, a long peace ensues for 400 years, during which time the first men enter Beleriand, and by crossing over the Blue Mountains. When Morgoth broke the siege of Angmond, one by one the elven kingdoms fell. Even hidden city of Gondolin fell. The only measurable success achieved by elves and men came when Beren of the Edain and Luthien, daughter of Thingol and Melanion, retrieved a Silmaril, a jewel, from the crown of Morgoth. Afterward, Beren and Luthien die and were restored to life by the Valar, the Archangel, with the understanding that Luthien was to become mortal and Beren should never be seen by men again. Thingol then quarrels with the dwarves in the story of Nogrod, and they kill him, stealing the jewel. With the help of Ents, the guardians of the trees, Beren waylaid the dwarves and recovered it, which he gave to Luthien. Soon afterwards, both Beren and Luthien die again. The Silmaril, the jewel, was then given to their son Dior Half-Elven, who had restored the kingdom of Doriath. The sons of Fëanor demanded that Dior surrender the jewel to them, but he refused. The Fëanorians destroyed Doriath and killed Dior in the second kinslaying. But Dior's young daughter Elwyn escapes with the jewel. 3 sons of Fëanor, Celgorm, Curufin, and Caranthir, died trying to take that jewel back. Remember, the jewel is from the crown of Satan. They're fighting over a talisman, an immense heirloom, which, like any other heirloom, rightfully belongs in the family. By the end of the age, all that remains of the free elves and the men in Beleriand was a settlement at the mouth of the river Sirion. That's also Mount Hermon's name, I said before, if you'll recall. It's also known as the Mountain of the Chief. It straddles the border between Lebanon and Syria, the place where the two sides are doing battle today. There's nothing new under the sun. History is merely repeating itself. And among them was Arundel, who married Elwing. But the Fëanorians again demanded the jewel of Satan's crown, the Silmaril, be returned to them. And after their demand was rejected, they made plans to take their jewel by force, leading to the third kinslaying. Arundel and Elwyn took the jewel across the great sea to beg the Valar, the Archangel, the most powerful Archangel, for a pardon and help forgive them for their sins and help them defeat their enemies. Sound familiar? The Valar agreed to side with them. Sound even more familiar? Melkor, who is Satan, is captured. Most of his works were destroyed, and he was banished beyond the confines of the world into the Door of Night. The Silmarils, those jewels, were recovered at a terrible cost, as Beleriand himself was broken and began to sink under the sea. Atlantis. Fëanor's last remaining sons, the last of the bloodline, Medros and Maglor, they're called, were ordered to return to Valinor. They tried to steal the jewels from the victorious Valar, but, as with Melkor, the jewels burned their hands, and it was then they realized they were not meant to possess them, and that the oath was null and void. Each of the brothers then died. Medros threw himself with the Silmaril into a chasm of fire in Manglor. threw his Cimmeril into the sea, his jewel into the sea. So the 3 Cimmerils ended in the sky with Arendelle, in the earth, and in the sea. That's how the Second Age began. Yes, I believe J.R.R. Tolkien is really mapping out what's to come here on Earth. In the Second Age, Edain were given the island of Numenor, Atlantis, toward the west of the Great Sea as their home, while many elves were welcomed to the west. The Numenorians, or Atlanteans, became great navigators of the sea, but also became more and more jealous of the elves because they possessed immortality. But after a few centuries, Sauron, Morgoth's chief servant, began to organize evil creatures in the eastern lands. He persuades elven smiths, fashioners of metal, in Agrion to create rings of power, and secretly forged the one ring to control the other rings. But the elves became aware of Sauron's plan as soon as he put the one ring on his hand, and they removed their own rings before he could master their wills. The last Numenorian king, Ar-Pharazôn, by the strength of his army, humbled even Sauron and brought him to Numenor as a hostage, but with the help of one ring. Sauron deceived Ar-Pharazôn and convinced the king to invade Aman, promising immortality for those who set foot on the undying lands. Just exactly like ISIS would do. Die for the cause as a suicide bomber, and we promise you immortality. Amandil, chief of those still faithful to the Valar, the archangels, tried to sail west to seek their aid. His son, Elendil, and his grandsons, Isildur and Anarion, prepared to flee east to Middle-earth. When the king's forces landed on Aman, the Valar called for Lúvatar, the creator, to intervene. I'll pick the story up from there on Talk Radio AM 640, right after this break on Space. I'm the guy to call Space. It's a view from space. It's Talk Radio AM 640. Final segment of tonight's show. Now, the Third Age, this is our future, according to J.R.R. Tolkien and the Illuminati, saw the rise in power of the realms of Arnor and Gondor and their decline again, Ireland and England. By the time of the Lord of the Rings, Sauron had recovered most of his former strength and was seeking the One Ring. He discovered that it was in the possession of a hobbit and sent out the 9 ringwraiths to retrieve it. The ring-bearer, Frodo Baggins, traveled to Rivendell, where it was decided that the ring had to be destroyed in the only way possible, casting it into the fires of Mount Doom. Frodo then sets out on the quest with 8 companions. Yes, that's the Sun Worshippers number. That's known as the Fellowship of the Ring. It's the last moment that he fails. But with the intervention of the creature Gollum, who was saved by the pity of Frodo and Bilbo Baggins, the ring was nevertheless destroyed. Frodo, with his companion Sam Gamgee, were hailed as heroes. Sauron was destroyed forever, and his spirit dissipated into nothingness. The The end of the Third Age marked the end of the dominion of the elves and the beginning of the dominion of men as the Fourth Age began. Many of the elves who lingered in the Middle Earth left for Valinor, never to return. Those who remained behind would fade and diminish. The dwarves eventually dwindled away as well, but they eventually returned in large numbers and resettled Moria. Peace was restored between Gondor, which is England today, and the lands to the south and east. That's obviously the European Holy Roman Empire there. Eventually, the tales of the earlier ages became legends, and the truth behind them forgotten. I believe that when the king to come replaces Queen Elizabeth II, he'll be asked to become king of the ancient Holy Roman Empire that's now the European Union, that's been revived, but just as J.R.R. Tolkien has the earth changing shape as it never was before, so is what the Illuminati are doing today. Remember, Tolkien talked about the snuffing out of the light, the refracting, the breaking up of the light. Well, the Illuminati believe it was Lucifer that broke apart the light of paradise, the pure white light of truth, and in so doing created color, created shape, created sound. In other words, this is how the Illuminati believe Lucifer is the creator of heaven and earth, the light bringer. More accurately, he's merely the divider of light. Breaks up pure truth, white light, into many colors, and gives you an illusion. Satanic. This mystical information is known as Kabbalism. How to split, refract light, divide light, which has been passed on to the Illuminati power brokers with a slight twist. The rulers of ancient Sumer, Babylon, were the first to receive the knowledge of Kabbalism. Demonic entities then interbred with human women, just like Tolkien's stories, producing leaders of renown and of demonic influence. These are the mythological people we are taught, brainwashed today. These leaders claim to have the divine right of kings to rule us. In other words, Lucifer gave them the right to be royal or chosen. Remember that it was only the rulers of the world's empires, the powerful leaders, that lay claim to the divine right to rule. Who said you were king? God did. The divine right to rule. They in turn adopted a group of humanity, common Babylonian people, to manipulate through the sharing of this Kabbalistic knowledge. This was the way the shamans or priests were anointed and the occult religion established. As the centuries passed by, Kabbalism seduced many other European groups. Eventually, it passed on into the hands of the Masonic Christian and the Roman Catholic Church. The Society of Jesuits went right round the world. The Knights Templar, the Masonic Christian Crusaders, also laid claim to this knowledge at around 1000 AD and grew through the secret society of Freemasonry as we know it today. The mystic knowledge is handed down and around to whomever is appointed to take the Illuminati agenda to the next level. The rulers of the world's great empires have intermarried too since the beginning of human history, and in this way the genetic Kabbalistic information strictly maintained and kept hidden. The royal families of Europe, who are really all one family, only marry within their own bloodline and will shun any family member who marries a commoner. This is the demonic-inspired bloodline with their so-called divine right to rule. They are the chosen people of God in their own eyes, as stated in the New Testament, which is the new next stage of the agenda. The creation of the number system was the crucial first step to global manipulation. Google Pythagoras, the ancient Greek mathematician and philosopher, who's called one of the most influential men in all of history. He's highly revered in Masonry, as well as in dark occultism, and has been throughout the ages. Numbers are looked upon as sacred. I mean, after all, sacred geometry is the number system made into religion. That's why Masonry's symbolism is the compass and the square. They're not really interested in physical buildings being built as much as fulfilling the agendas of the god Lucifer. But they worship being seen as the architect of the universe, and to this end apply the principles of their sacred geometry to build endless monuments, endless systems to manipulate the world. They use landmark buildings as strategic symbols of their influence and power. Their agenda uses the flawed system of numbers and language rituals to build order out of chaos. Masonry conspires and orchestrates plots on behalf of the Illuminati bloodline families, sincerely believing they are fulfilling the will of God. Without the number system, there can't be any global deception or manipulation. Think about that. How could there be a stock exchange? How could there be banks to put everyone in debt? Without numbers, there's no money. We wouldn't be chasing the almighty dollar bill just to pay all your bills. Imagine a world with no bills. Now, that's paradise. Every corruption in the world is a result of an occult religion or some scientific system using numbers. So you can easily see the reason those desiring to control and manipulate the masses must create this type of number system before they can succeed. And after all, what is computing? Zeros and ones. And you can control the world. The confusion, the corruption that you and I have been born into is a very, very heavy load to bear. Humanity's natural state is sexual desire. We're attached to each other. And the Illuminati know all the tricks on how to divide and conquer. This has been A View from Space and Talk Radio AM 640. Coast to Coast is next. I'm Space, and I am